Hello you, and welcome back to this Season 14, Episode 19 of the Ubuntu podcast. It's Wednesday, the 14th of July, and I'm joined by my good friends Mark, hello.
Hello.
Hello there, and Alan, how are you?
Tickety-boo.
Wonderful. This evening, we're going to be covering some community news and events and some news headlines. Now, before I bring my friends in to have their little bit of say about what they've been up to, I would like to ask you, dear listener, to take a look at our website, ubuntupodcast.org/donate. The reason that you hear us is thanks to Joe Ressington, who edits our podcasts every week. And we would like to draw your attention to our crowdfunding in order to support Joe to do that fine work. So if you enjoy this podcast, please consider heading over to ubuntupodcast.org/donate and chucking in a few quid to help fund that effort. Thank you very much. And with that, Mark, what have you been up to?
I have been trying to play Doom Eternal.
Did you buy that with the Patreon money?
No, I bought it. Oh, it was on sale recently, so I bought it for quite a reasonable price. And last night I thought, I'll give that a go. So I pressed install, and it said, "You do not have sufficient disk space." And I thought, goodness me. I better delete the last game I was playing. That's probably taking up about 10, 15 gig or so. So I went and deleted that. So I had a nice 60 gigs free, and I pressed install, and it said, "You do not have sufficient disk space." So it turns out that you need about 70 gigs to install a AAA game these days, which was news to me.
Wow. And how much space did you have after shuffling things around?
I just about managed to make enough space. But by that point, it was my bedtime, so I haven't actually played it yet. But yes, I think my Steam box is in need of an SSD upgrade if I'm going to continue playing games in the future.
I remember when GTA 5 came out a few years ago, and I'm pretty sure I pre-ordered that, and it came out and was 48 or something like that gig in size. And with all the multiplayer stuff that's been added since, it's enormous compared to when it first came out, we thought 45 gig. I'm not doing the floppy disks were big in my day, but 45 gig seemed huge. And now it's, 60, 70, 80, 100. It's mad.
Yeah, it's not like it's cassette tapes or floppy disks or
Remember
anything,
the days.
is it? I mean, remember when PlayStation games came on CD-ROMs, and that was huge. So, Alan, what have you been up to?
I've been playing chess.
What?
Yeah. So at work, at Influx Data, we have an outreach team, and they organize stuff for the company internally to keep everyone talking to each other and keep everyone motivated and keep everyone happy. And there's stuff like tie-dye day, where we all get expense some dye and tie-dye t-shirt, or there's ice cream day where we make ice creams. And this week, we've kicked off a chess tournament across the entire company, and we're using chess.com. And there's a couple of people in the company who are really avid players, who are really excellent. And then there's me at the other end of the scale. And they've given you an on-ramp, play 5 games at chess.com, and then they evaluate, your level and match you up with other people. And they've got a bracket, to have us head towards the final, where, we'll play one of the grandmasters of the company.
When you say play 5 games, is that against some cloud-based AI or a human somewhere on the planet?
I don't think it really matters.
Oh, okay.
to get your ranking. It kind of doesn't matter. You just play 5 games. They're only 10-minute games, so you each get 10 minutes. But today I had 2 games. Now, the interesting thing is, it's not just you play the other person. I joined a Zoom call with my colleague, and I played against her. And you know her, it's Pat Gaunt from X-Canonical.
Okay. I was about to say, did you know your opponent prior to playing?
Well, this is the thing. Even if you don't know them, it's a way to meet other people in the company. It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
So we had to play 2 games, one where I'm white and she's black, and one where she's white and I'm black. And the interesting thing is, Stephen, who organised this thing, is able to see the game as it's playing online. And creates a live stream on Twitch that the rest of the company can tune into and listen to him giving a narration of the moves that we're doing wrong and how well we're doing and how badly we're doing. And then he archives them on YouTube later. But I could see chat going by in Slack. I wasn't obviously watching the live stream because I was playing. But I could see stuff going by in the chat where other members of the company were like, "Oh, use your queen, use this, use that." It was brilliant. It was really, really good fun. It's a great idea for getting people introduced into chess and getting people introduced to people in the company you might not normally work with.
Brilliant. My colleagues have watched some of my live streams, it turns out, and I've been called out for being a terrible chicken this week.
A terrible chicken?
Yeah, maybe more on that next week. And with that, let's move on. And now it is time for some community news and event. Now, I hear on the grapevine that Ubuntu Touch over-the-air 18 has a call for testing. So the development seems to be slowing down with a focus to 2004.
Yeah, so I think they're currently based on 1804.
1604, I think.
1604. So they're now planning to shift their base to 2004, which means that other development on the platform is going to slow down in the meantime, because that's obviously quite a big job. But there has been some other new additions in the meantime which have gone into this OTA update. One of the ones which I thought was particularly interesting was that there's a new mechanism for wallpaper scaling. So if you've got a lower resolution screen than the default wallpaper, it scales it down. And before, that was apparently a really heavyweight process, and their new way of doing it will save 60 megabytes of RAM on the BQ 4.5.
Wow.
Which is one of the smaller phones.
This feels like familiar ground for me. We were here with Mate Desktop a couple of years ago, and turns out wallpapers, high quality fidelity wallpapers, are a bit spendy on system RAM.
I never would have thought that was a big thing.
No, they totally are.
Yeah, that thing that happens to be drawn on the screen every single time you minimize or switch desktop or,
I just think, it's always just sitting there. It's not doing anything.
No,
it's
not using any resources. Those pixels are painted on their own. They're in the background. They're just...
Well, no, it's just they're always there under the other windows, right? So you've never got to put them back. I know computers. So there's been a rewrite of the Media Hub, which is like the service that handles playing and routing media, sound and stuff. And I think they're asking people to test any apps that do audio and video, basically, against those changes. There's been some improvements to the browser usability, and there's better snoozing. So if you don't like to get up when your alarm goes off, you'll now be better served by Ubuntu Touch.
Is it really that's what that's talking about? Or is it talking about process?
No, alarm snoozing. So now if you miss an alarm, it automatically snoozes. And when you snooze an alarm, it now snoozes from when you told it to snooze, not when the alarm started ringing.
Ah, clever.
So I think the message I'm getting from this is I need to get my BQ 4.5 out of the rack there, start using that as my morning alarm, and then making excellent excuses why it was so convenient for me to be asleep whilst everyone else was getting up and going to school in the morning.
That's exactly the message.
Well, I'm ahead of you. I got my Pine phone and I updated it. I didn't actually notice a huge amount of change, but then I don't use it as a daily driver. I think if you're used to using Ubuntu Touch or UBports on your phone on a regular basis, I think these quality of life improvements you would notice. But for someone like me who gets out the box whenever we talk about it and then puts it away again, like a terrible user, then I probably don't notice these things. But it was quite interesting because I booted it up, gave it a charge, boosted it up, put the new update on there. And then, as I always do, I browse the open app store. and have a look for anything new that I haven't seen before, which is nothing really to do with UBports itself. It's not the platform. It's, what apps are available.
The ecosystem.
Yeah. And I noticed a few interesting games and things in there, and I always install whatever I find that takes my fancy. So I'm turning into that archetypal user who just uses it, to play with as a secondary device. Much like we always talked about users who use Ubuntu and open the store and just browse around and install random things that they see. So I'm becoming that person with the Ubuntu phone.
Can I ask you a question? For somebody that was involved right at the origins of like the Ubuntu phone project, do you see any significant difference in what UBports is offering today versus where it left off?
Well, there's big things in there that we never had, and there's also stuff that they've done that we did that they've removed. Like all the scopes stuff is gone, which is probably a good thing, and it's back to being an app launcher that just is a list of icons like most other traditional phone platforms. So there's certainly user interface tweaks that I notice. But actually, what pleases me more is the familiarity. Like I opened the weather app and I noticed that there were parts of that I had a hand in designing way back at the start, and they're still there. So it's actually, I quite like the fact that stuff doesn't change, because it gives me happy memories of when we worked on that stuff. So yeah, it is nice to see stuff getting replaced, but it's also nice to see a little bit of Popey in there.
A little hint of days past. So, Alan, what else did you find this week?
There are changes afoot to the Ubuntu membership process. You know something about this, don't you, Mark?
Yeah, so after my proposal, which we spoke about a while back now, there's been numerous discussions.
I think in the first episode of this series, I think is when we first touched on that.
Quite possibly. Yeah, so there's been quite a lot of discussion and back and forth about what's possible and what's desired and what's needed in the process of becoming an Ubuntu member. And this week, the Community Council has actually approved a change to the membership process, which means that you are no longer going to have to PGP sign the code of conduct as part of your membership process. There'll be another process for basically ticking a box or filling a form and saying, yes, I've read and accepted this. But also another significant change is that as part of the membership board interview, you're now going to be explicitly asked, have you read the code of conduct? Do you accept the code of conduct? And do you intend to abide by the code of conduct?
So the membership meeting is now also a EULA, where you have to scroll to the bottom and click yes.
It's interesting, like the way that some of the conversation around this went. It actually seems that it's not just, my intention with all of this was that, I wanted to make it easier for non-technical members to be able to apply, but also it sounds like there's been a few bumps in the road recently with dealing with issues in the community whereby it's more technical than ticking a box, but sort of socially it is a box ticking exercise just to say yes, that's been accepted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a person has fully understood what's in
committed.
And committed and is taking it seriously, rather than just trying to find ways of skirting around it or ways to use it to annoy people and so on.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting point, because it doesn't matter which community you dip into, there are often codes of conduct, but few communities uphold them, and you see, frankly, flagrant abuse of the code of conduct by established members of the community, and they ride roughshod over it. So I kind of like the fact that the COC is now being sort of double checked as you've really read this and you're really prepared to abide by it, and this is important to us, because the grounds on which we produce this podcast are under the auspices of the Ubuntu COC.
It's funny, over the years, at different ends of that scale, there have been people who have flouted the code of conduct very clearly, but nothing's been done. They've not been sanctioned or reprimanded in any way. And then there's people who deliberately unsign the code of conduct do something terrible and then re-sign it again afterwards. And so they know that if anyone reprimands them, they can say, but I hadn't signed the code of conduct at that point. And so they flout the rules, and they don't stick with the spirit of the code of conduct. They're manipulating the process. So I think this helps to improve that. Definitely. But one thing Ubuntu used to be really terrible at is getting rid of bad actors. And more recently, someone was removed. Their Ubuntu membership was removed because they clearly weren't abiding by the code of conduct. So I think the Ubuntu community are getting better at that and getting faster at it, because it used to take a long time to get someone kicked out who was a bad actor. And it really negatively impacts all the people who work with them if you don't get rid of them. And by getting rid of them, you can move on and have a more positive life, really.
Indeed. And also less GPG signing of things. Well done, Mark. I don't feel so bad for sort of chivying you along to apply for your membership now, because there's been all sorts of positive fallout from your application process. So that was fabulous.
Well, next, the process of getting on Planet Ubuntu is in my sights.
Excellent.
Good luck with that. Right then. So, Mark, what else have you seen this week?
The Document Foundation are running a survey of LibreOffice Calc users. So LibreOffice Calc is the spreadsheet application, which is part of the LibreOffice suite. And they're doing a bit of a sort of usage survey to get a feel for how people are using LibreOffice and what features they use and how they find the usability of it, so that they can gauge where to focus their resources in improving LibreOffice Calc.
Interesting. I wonder if they're going to get any feedback that helps push things forward, because my limited perception of things. So my wife in a former life was an accountant, and my wife is a spreadsheet goddess. She can do all manner of things in spreadsheets that I simply don't comprehend nor understand. And I get looked at with gazes of disdain and sympathy every time I try to do something in a spreadsheet. So if I was to answer this, I would be approaching this from a very sort of level one perspective in terms of what I need a spreadsheet to do and how well it does that for me, which in the case of LibreOffice, it does everything I need. I wonder if they're going to hit like the, in air quotes, power users who really sort of stretch the legs of what a spreadsheet system can do.
They do ask some of the questions. I've had a look through the questions that they ask in the survey, and they do ask if you use other tools. And some of those tools are, what you would consider power math tools. And they ask you, I think the very last question asks you about how much you agree or disagree with certain statements about how complex the program is and whether it's cumbersome to use. And so I think they're filtering early on to determine what your level is and what you're familiar with, and then asking you questions at the end, which are, okay, how do you feel? And so they can then use that data to decide whether, experts say it's too good or too bad, and, novice users find it too complex or whatever. So yeah, it seems like they're gathering the right kind of data, and it's a very short survey. I'd strongly recommend, if you use LibreOffice, to have a go at filling it in, because it's 5 minutes. It doesn't take long.
Excellent. And we'll have a link to the show notes to that survey. And even if you don't use LibreOffice, then maybe fill it in anyway. Follow the path and do that thing. And last in this roundup, I see that ZC standard compression for Debs in 2110 may become a thing.
Yes. So this is Z standard. It's a compression algorithm for basically doing a decent level of compression, but very quickly. And there was some groundwork put in to Ubuntu 18.04 to allow it to be used for Debs, so stuff being installed via apt, with the plan being to then contribute that up to Debian and it being a system-wide thing. It turns out that doing something like that takes quite a while. But now it's in enough of the system that the archive can be built and packaged using Z standard instead of whichever compression algorithm it was using previously, which should make installing stuff a bit quicker.
Indeed. So, Debs, like many other software packages, are compressed in some fashion. And Z Standard is the compression algorithm we deserve in 2021. Until somebody comes up with something better, it's like this perfect balance between performance optimized and size efficiency. So this is good work. And I know that Z Standard was one of those things that people wanted to use for a long time, but it didn't make it into the kernel. Mm-hmm. For things like, Squash FS and stuff like that for some considerable time. So I think we're entering into a new utopia of compression algorithms on the Linux landscape.
It's funny, whenever I see people complain that, you should change to this thing, whatever this thing might be, whether it's HTTPS over the wire or new compression algorithm. And sometimes it can be fair to say that developers are dragging their feet, or developers are finding other things that are more interesting or more important to do than what compression algorithm is used. But sometimes there's actually a whole bunch of other stuff that has to happen as well, and you can't just flick a switch. And Ubuntu being a thing that is so widely used on many different systems, if we were to implement a change, and I know this was a factor in some other places, if we implemented a change to a particular compression algorithm, it might make things actually worse for some people on certain architectures, like, ARM SoCs. Some of them are not very good. They don't have the instructions that can offload this kind of stuff very easily to the, more easily to the CPU rather than doing it in software. So, it's very welcome. I'm not surprised it took a while.
Indeed. And now we have one event. Seagull 2021. So Seagull is an event that takes place on the Pacific coast just up from Seattle, and they are running an online event between the 5th and 6th of November via their internet, and they have their call for papers open. So if you would like to participate in that event, if you've got something you would like to tell the rest of the community about, you have until August the 5th to submit your papers to that conference. And that rounds up the community news and event. So now it's time to dig into big tech news. So I saw with interest there are some accusations leveled against OnePlus and the performance behavior of the OnePlus 9 and 9 Pro phones. And ordinarily, when you hear something like this, it's usually because they are over-allocating resources to some synthetic benchmark to make their results look more favorable. But in this case, they're actually moving certain workloads off to the low power cores on the SoC in order to preserve battery endurance and presenting a significantly reduced performance curve to the user. And this has been uncovered through an Antec, I think, originally.
So the complaint here is that OnePlus are doing something very specific to specific applications. So they're targeting specific applications which are well known, like Google Chrome and some other applications, and they know which processes they are. And the kernel is being told, move that to the smaller, lower power CPU cores rather than the larger, faster ones. In part of this ARM big little architecture where you've got 4 fast cores and 4 like lower power cores or high efficiency cores or whatever they call them. I find it difficult to get cross about this because it feels like OnePlus are doing something for the users. Like they're doing something which benefits the user, which is that the battery will last longer, which is one complaint that is universal across all mobile phones is, the battery isn't big enough or it doesn't last long enough. Okay, people complain that things can be slow, but in these benchmarks, either synthetic or real world, does it really make that much difference?
That's the thing I'm wondering is if this wasn't benchmarked and shown to be the case, would anyone have noticed? I guess that in some cases, these are applications which might benefit, like Google Chrome kind of depends on which web page you're going to. It might benefit from having, all of the performance available to it. But for the most part, if it's running on the less performant processor, is anyone actually going to know? Well,
you could argue that having the browser, like I'm running for my train and the battery is low on my phone and I want to get my phone out and open the browser and I want to search for train times, which is a perfectly reasonable real world use case, right? If I've got my browser open for longer because it takes longer to process the JavaScript and all the other parts of the page, then my battery's going to potentially go down faster than if it executes.
It's like if your car's about to run out of fuel, then you better slam down on the accelerator so that you get there before you run out.
These are the dichotomies of power endurance. I know Intel have this whole race to the finish, their idea is you boost performance in order to get there quicker, which has a spike in energy, but you get there quicker. And over time, that's the more efficient approach. But I find this whole topic fascinating because for so many years, we've seen the inverse of this, which is people detecting the synthetic benchmarks that are being run and then artificially allocating them far more resources, and in some cases actually making the SoCs in phones, for example, overclock and run out of specification that the rest of the application developer ecosystem doesn't have access to, in order to make all of their specifications go up and to the right and look more favorable. And as Alan says, I think this is actually more user-focused and nuanced than, just making numbers look good, because I think every release of Android, correct me if I'm wrong, listener, but I think every release of Android has had some sort of subtext along the lines of, this saves more battery power than the last version.
Right, so it's certainly something people want, longer battery life, but no, not that. Don't do that. do anything else, like make the thing last longer, but don't do that. And I think part of the problem is it's OnePlus. And OnePlus is very much, or has been for a long while, very much the darling of the Android nerd, the uber Android nerd, not just the general person. Yeah, not just the normal person who goes and buys a Samsung, but the person who wants an enthusiast phone. And they are exactly the kind of person you don't want to annoy with this stuff. Whereas you look at something like the Apple MacBook Air with an M1 chip, as far as I understand it, they do exactly the same thing, but they do it with the OS. They push the OS processes down onto the smaller cores of the CPU so that your applications that you care about, whether it's Chrome or whatever, get to run on the big boy processor.
Indeed. So I noticed that Geekbench has removed the OnePlus 9 series devices from their charts of results as an outcome of these findings. But you make a good point, because my first thought is, well, Apple control that ecosystem very tightly. They could have been doing this for a long time, and maybe they are, and we will never know. But, when you look at the browser performance comparisons, the effective comparison you can do with browser technologies on mobile devices seem to suggest that Apple are not, in air quotes, gimping the performance of their browser for various websites.
They were just gimping the whole thing, right? Making the battery last longer, right?
Indeed, it's a fascinating area. like you, I do wonder, like, is this actually bad or is this actually user-centric and user-focused? Let us know. Write into show@ubuntupodcast.org. What do you think? Is this anti-user or pro-user features? Alan.
Cheat Maker brags of computer vision auto-aim that works on any game.
What?
So this I found fascinating. So as we know, there are cheaters in gaming, and that's been as old as the hills, right?
No.
Developers create and sell software mods to games to give the player an advantage. And anti-cheat software like BattleEye seeks to resolve this by detecting the cheat software patches and their behavior. Well, a new product has arrived which seeks to one-up the anti-cheat. And what this does is use hardware. So imagine you're playing a video game on your computer. You have the HDMI output go to a capture card, which goes into another computer, which also has the ability to inject key presses and mouse movements to your gaming computer. And it does computer vision stuff on the display, so it can see the game. It's basically another pair of very high frame rate eyes with computer vision that can see the enemies and lock on and move by injecting the right key presses into the computer that's playing the game in order to move and shoot the right person. So you get headshot or whatever it is that the particular game is playing.
So it's computer assisted movement that's actually computer assisted outside of the game.
Yes. And it makes it harder for the software developer of the game to detect because it's not a patch to the game. There's no fundamental change at the OS level. It's just a very fast computer looking at the screen, figuring out where the alien is and moving, your reticule over the enemy. Now, that's great. I mean, it would need to have some hysteresis or something in there in order to make it look a bit more human-like, because that probably could be detected if it moves in a straight line from one part of the screen to another.
Yeah.
I was going to say a little bit of linear interpolation will smooth that out, no problem.
However, the developer who made this hardware cheat or promoted this hardware cheat, they made a video online promoting this new feature of upcoming of their project. And then another story comes out very soon after. Activision have made them take it all down, and their Discord is down, the website's down, all the videos that they previously published with promotion for their software, their hardware software solution, all gone. And they put a little announcement out saying, well, we didn't really have to take this down, but we decided it would probably be a good idea. So I suspect some lawyers had a little knock at the door of this person and made them stop.
Made them an offer they couldn't refuse.
Yes. I wouldn't be surprised if other people are making this, or this probably already exists. I would be amazed if it doesn't already exist, because hardware capture devices, as Martin knows, are 10 a penny, and you can use open source software like OpenCV to do this kind of stuff. It ain't hard.
Even cheap hardware capture devices like are like £5 and can do 30 frames per second, which is equal to human perception, and, spend double that and you can get a whole lot more. So, Mark, you have one more item, I think.
Yes. Open UK's open source report has been published. They have run they're running a series of surveys, and this survey they've run was of UK businesses and organisations on their use of open source software. And what they have found is that 97% of respondents use open source software in their organisation.
No way.
How is it only 97%? That's
I know it's not used that people use open source software. That's kind of obvious. You can't avoid using open source software. What's interesting is that they've kind of done a bit more of a breakdown into what people do and don't use it for. So the main things that they reported using it for were programming languages, operating systems, and development tools. Where they're not particularly using it is in security. So in like looking for security exploits in infrastructure and things like that, people don't tend to use open source software as much. They also looked at contributing back and found that only about 63% of people contribute back in any way. Sorry, organisations contribute back in any way, and less than half actually develop.
You prefix that with only. That's not a bad stat. Only 63%.
I meant only as compared to the number who use it in total.
Right.
Yes, but
That's
no,
not
okay,
bad,
no, it's
though.
fair to say that, 63% of companies who use open source contributing back it's a fairly good statistic. Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the main driver for using open source software is cost saving, as opposed to the wish to collaborate and be part of a community, unfortunately. But I think we probably all could have guessed that.
Yeah, businesses don't want to work together, it turns out, and that's a universal constant. Right, and with that, let's move on. And I say move on, we're going to shut up shop. That was it. That was episode 19 of the Ubuntu podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week when we'll be doing a host of things, including bringing you some command line love and going over your feedback. And we're going to have a discussion topic, which is mysterious in its nature. So join us for that. If you want to send us your feedback between shows, you can do that by emailing show@ubuntupodcast.org or joining us at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram. And if you want to send us hateful comments, then you can do that at youtube.com/ubuntupodcast. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll look forward to speaking to you next time.